Simon moved through the silent, marble-floored halls of the law firm like a quiet shadow, his worn-out brooms sweeping away the remnants of a day filled with high-stakes arguments. To the ambitious lawyers who hurried past him, he was merely an invisible fixture, a man whose existence was defined by the trash he collected. None of them knew that behind those tired eyes lay a mind that had once presided over the highest courts, a man whose legal opinions had once shaped the fabric of justice before a tragic conspiracy forced him into exile. He had chosen the life of a janitor not because he lacked options, but because he wanted to be close to the law without the burden of the corruption he had witnessed. He found peace in manual labor, watching the theater of human ego from the sidelines, knowing that the most powerful people in the room were often the most blind to the truth. His heart still beat for true justice, but he had buried his voice deep beneath his gray uniform, content to remain a ghost in the temple of law he had helped build decades ago. Victoria, a rising star and the firm's youngest partner, was a woman whose brilliance was matched only by her icy arrogance. She viewed the legal system as a chessboard where people were merely pieces to be sacrificed for her winning streak. During a stressful evening, she found Simon organizing the legal archives with a precision that caught her eye. Instead of seeing his dedication, she saw an opportunity to vent her frustration. "Don't touch those files, old man," she snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet office like a blade. "Those documents contain intellectual property far beyond your understanding. You might read the words, but you could never comprehend the complex architecture of a legal victory." She laughed with a hollow tone, looking at Simon's calloused hands with disdain. To her, he was just a functional shadow, a relic of a class meant to serve the elite without thought. She didn't care about his history. She only cared that her office was clean, never imagining that the man she was belittling had forgotten more about the law than she had ever learned. The tension reached a breaking point during a high-profile pro bono case Victoria had taken for publicity. It involved a young mother facing unfair eviction by a powerful conglomerate. Victoria was losing the battle, her usual tactics failing against a massive legal team. One evening, near defeat, she saw Simon looking at the case files on her desk. She delivered a cruel, public challenge. "You look at these papers as if you have an opinion, Simon," she sneered, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "Tell you what, if a common janitor like you can write a closing argument that can sway a judge in this case, I will personally resign and hand you my office. But since your only skill is emptying bins, why don't you focus on the floor instead of the law?" She didn't realize her words had ignited a dormant flame of judicial fire. Simon didn't argue. He simply gave her a small, knowing smile that made her feel strangely uncomfortable, a gaze that suggested he saw right through her armor of pride. Simon's past was a legacy of unwavering integrity that had once made him a target for powerful men. He had been a judge of the highest order, known for finding the human element within the cold text of the law. But when he refused a bribe from a corrupt faction, they destroyed his life, framing him and taking away everything he loved. He had survived the storm, but the law had become painful, leading to his disappearance into the life of a cleaner. Victoria's mockery was the final catalyst he needed. That night, after the office lights were dimmed, Simon sat at a small desk in the archives. He pulled out a fountain pen he had kept hidden and began to write. He wasn't just writing a legal defense. He was writing a symphony of justice. He used forgotten precedents and invoked a sense of moral clarity lost in the modern era of technicalities. He worked with intensity, his mind sharp, blending old-world wisdom with a tactical brilliance that was unstoppable, pouring his soul into every word. The day of the final hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed with experts who expected to see Victoria suffer her first major defeat. She was pale and exhausted, her arguments feeling hollow. Just before her closing statement, she found a handwritten envelope on her table. Inside was a document written in a beautiful, classical script. As she read the first lines, her heart skipped a beat. The logic was flawless, the emotional weight staggering, and the legal maneuvers were so brilliant they seemed to leap off the page. She realized she was holding a masterpiece of jurisprudence. She looked toward the back of the courtroom and saw Simon sitting in the public gallery in his simple clothes, his face a mask of calm support. She had a choice: use her failing words and lose, or humble herself and speak the truth written by the man she had mocked. With a deep breath, she stood up and began to read the words Simon had written, her voice gaining a strength and conviction she had never known. The atmosphere shifted instantly as Victoria spoke. The judge, known for his severity, leaned forward, his eyes widening in surprise as the arguments dismantled the conglomerate's defense with surgical precision. The words didn't just speak to the law. They spoke to the soul of the community, reminding everyone that the purpose of the court was to protect the vulnerable, not to serve the powerful. The opposing lawyers sat in stunned silence, unable to find a single flaw in the logic or a counter-argument that didn't sound like greed. It was a total transformation of the trial. Victoria felt like a vessel for a much larger power, her arrogance replaced by awe at the depth of the intellect she was channeling. The young mother began to weep with relief as she realized she was finally being heard. When Victoria finished, there was absolute silence, the kind that follows a divine revelation. Even the court reporters forgot to type, their eyes fixed on the young woman who had just delivered the most important speech of her career. When the verdict was read, it was a landmark victory for the mother. The courtroom erupted into a roar of approval, and Victoria was immediately surrounded by cameras. But she didn't feel like a winner. She felt like a student who had seen true greatness. She pushed through the crowd, searching for the man in the public gallery, but Simon was already gone. He had vanished as quietly as he arrived. She returned to the office late that night, the weight of her promise heavy on her shoulders. She looked at her luxury office and certificates, and they all felt like empty toys. She found Simon in the break room, quietly cleaning a coffee machine as if nothing had happened. She didn't snap. She didn't demand an explanation. Instead, she sat down across from him, her expensive suit looking out of place, and placed her senior partner badge on the table. Her head was bowed, her pride finally broken by the sheer weight of his mercy and brilliance. "I promised to resign, Simon," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I was blind. I treated you like a shadow, when you were the only one who truly understood the light of justice. I don't deserve this office, and I certainly don't deserve the win you gave me today." Simon stopped and looked at her with a gentle, fatherly kindness. He didn't take the badge. "I didn't give you that win to take your job, Victoria," he said softly, his voice echoing with the authority of the judge he once was. "I gave it to you so you could learn that the law is a tool for the heart, not a weapon for the ego. You have the talent to be a great protector, but you were using it to build a wall around yourself. A victory gained through pride is hollow, but a victory gained through empathy is a legacy." He pushed the badge back toward her, telling her that his time in the spotlight was over, but hers was just beginning if she chose to lead with her soul. Victoria didn't resign, but she became a different person. She transformed the firm into a center for human rights, taking cases other lawyers deemed unprofitable. She became Simon's most devoted student, spending evenings in the archives not to work, but to listen to his stories of the true meaning of the scales of justice. She learned that a lawyer's greatest strength isn't arguing, but listening to the whispers of the unheard. Simon remained at the firm, no longer as a janitor, but as the unofficial consultant emeritus, a man whose wisdom guided every major decision the partners made. He found his redemption not in a return to power, but in the transformation of a young woman who would carry his light into a new generation. The firm became a beacon of hope in a city that had long forgotten the taste of true justice, proving that the most powerful voices are often the ones we try hardest to ignore. The final scene finds Victoria and Simon standing on the steps of the courthouse after a successful day. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the city, and Victoria is carrying a briefcase while Simon walks beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. They are no longer master and servant. They are two seekers of truth who found each other in the dust of an archive room. Simon finally found the family he had lost in the heart of the woman he had saved from herself. He realized that his life hadn't been destroyed. It had simply been rerouted to where he could do the most good. As they walked away, the shadows of the past were replaced by the light of a shared purpose. Victoria looked at her mentor and smiled, knowing she was no longer just a winner of cases, but a true servant of the people. And Simon felt the familiar, rhythmic pulse of a life well lived, a symphony of justice playing its closing, triumphant notes in the quiet evening air.